Someone once asked her if there were any deal breakers in dating for her. And she replied, just nobody who is religious. But then she began dating a Christian. And somewhere along in their relationship, he asked if she believed that Jesus was her Savior. And she was quite blunt when she said, no. But then he asked her, do you think that you could keep an open mind about it? Well, of course, she said. I'm very open-minded, even though I wasn't at all. She said, I derided Christians as anti-intellectual bigots who were too weak to face the reality that there is no rhyme or reason to the world. And I found this man's church attendance as an oddity to overlook and not a point in his favor. But she said, as he taught, I grew conflicted. On the one hand, she said, I was creeped out, and on the other hand, I had enormous respect for him. He is smart, educated, intellectually curious. And I remember thinking, what if this is true? And I'm not willing to consider it. And so she started going to church with him and found the sermons shook her faith in atheism. And after a while, her life began to go through some rocky times, and a friend suggested that she go to a specific Bible study in an apartment in New York. And she said, I remember walking into that Bible study. My stomach was in knots. In my mind, only weirdos and zealots went to Bible studies. I don't remember anything that was said that day. All I know is that when I left, everything had changed. I'll never forget standing outside of that apartment and saying to myself, it's true. It's completely true. And the world looked entirely different, like a veil had been lifted off of it. I had not one iota of doubt, and I was filled with indescribable joy. The horror of being a devout Christian crept back into Kirsten almost immediately. And she said, I spent the next few months doing my best to wrestle away from God. It was pointless, however. Everywhere I turned, there he was. Slowly, there was less fear and more joy. The hound of heaven had pursued me and caught me, whether I liked it or not. Now, Kirsten was a woman who doubted God. And we would expect to see doubt in the lives of atheists and agnostics. We would expect to see doubt in the lives of people who don't go to church. We would even expect to see doubt in the lives of those who just play at being Christians. But committed followers of Christ, they would never doubt, would they? Yeah. Every once in a while, they do too. In our text today, we find that one of Jesus' closest followers doubted. In fact, his very name has become a byword for doubt. And when we encounter someone who refuses to believe something that is true, we call them a doubting Thomas. So let's look at our text today, found in John chapter 20, beginning with verse 24. Now Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." And then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Now, there are several different Greek words translated doubt in the New Testament. And one means to hesitate. And that's the word that Jesus used when he said, "If any of you say to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt," does not hesitate in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. There is another Greek word which also means doubt, and that's the word used when Peter walked on water. Jesus came out walking on the water, and Peter asked if he can do the same. And Jesus says, "Sure, come on out." And Peter walks on the water. He's almost to Jesus, but then he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he begins to sink. He cries out for help, and Jesus reaches down and pulls him up out of the water. And when they got into the boat, Jesus asked him, "Why did you doubt?" And then the word used here in John chapter 20 about Thomas's doubt, which literally means no faith. Now, what that says to me is that there seems to be several flavors of doubt. There's the kind of doubt where I want to pray for something, but I hesitate about it because it just seems to be too bold, too outrageous. And then there is the kind of doubt where, like Peter on the water, I suddenly feel overwhelmed by my circumstances, and I take my eyes off of Jesus, and I find myself focusing more upon the crashing waves all around me. Now, we shouldn't doubt like that, but we do. But this doubt that Thomas had, this is a different kind of doubt. It is a dangerous form of doubt. The other flavors of doubt will slow us down in our faith. But the kind of doubt, this no faith kind of doubt that Thomas had, this doubt will destroy us. This kind of doubt will cut us off from God. The Apostle Paul warned Titus, "To the pure, all things are pure. But to those who are corrupted and do not believe, those who doubt, nothing is pure. In fact, both their minds and consciences are corrupted." And the writer of Hebrews warns the Christians that he's writing to. Take care, brothers, lest any of you undergo evil, unbelieving hearts, leading you to fall away from the living God. And the book of Revelation declares, but the cowardly, the unbelieving, those who doubt, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts and idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. People who have an unbelieving heart will end up in hell. And that's not a good thing. Now let's just step back for a moment and let's take another look at Thomas. Now, Thomas is a pretty good guy. In fact, it helps to know that Jesus prayed all night before he selected his 12 disciples. And Thomas makes the cut. He's a man who shows promise. He is a man who has the ability to believe and to act upon his belief. In fact, all of the other times that Thomas shows up in the Gospels, he looks pretty good. In Thomas, we have the picture of a committed follower of Jesus Christ. He loves Jesus. He walks with Jesus. He's willing to suffer and to die for Jesus. But then he shows up late to the party after Jesus rose from the grave. And the other disciples try to share with him the excitement that he's not having anything to do with. And you can almost hear the anger in his voice as he says, unless I see those nail marks in his hands and I am able to put my finger into those nail holes and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it. Whoa. I will not believe it. Notice he didn't say, I have my doubts. He didn't say, I'm having a little trouble accepting all of this. He didn't say, you're kidding me, right? He said, I will not believe it. Now, the other disciples may have had their doubts until they saw Jesus. But they never said, I won't believe. Now, that's a dangerous way to deal with God. I mean, doubt is one thing. But telling God what you will accept as proof is something entirely different. Telling God to come down and settle things on your terms is generally not a good idea. And so Thomas is being unreasonable here. But if Thomas is being unreasonable, why would Jesus even bother to show up? Why let Thomas put his fingers into the holes in his hands and in his side? Why would Jesus show mercy to him when Thomas refused to believe? You know what the answer is? I don't have a clue. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. All I know is that Jesus did show Thomas mercy. And it's a good thing, too, that Jesus showed him mercy. Have you ever said anything stupid to God or about God? If Jesus could show mercy to Thomas here, it's good to know that He'll probably show mercy to us as well. But notice something. Jesus did tell Thomas to stop it. Verse 27. Stop doubting and believe. Jesus showed Thomas mercy, but He put him on notice. Don't push it, Thomas. Don't walk around the edge of faith and gaze down into unbelief. Don't push it. Don't take your faith for granted. Don't do it, Thomas. For your salvation is at risk here. But what was it that Thomas was doubting? He was doubting that Jesus could do what He promised. For weeks before, Jesus repeatedly promised that He would rise from the dead. Jesus made a promise over and over and over again that on the third day He would rise. But Thomas refused to believe that Jesus could do what He promised. He had no faith in Jesus' promise. Now, I want you to notice what Jesus said to Thomas after allowing him to touch his wounds. Verse 29 says, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." You know what Jesus was saying? He's saying, I'm going to cut you some slack here, Thomas. But you have to realize not everyone is going to get this break. People will have to make up their mind to believe in me without touching. Hebrews chapter 11 teaches us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen, not seen. And so to have faith, you have to be able to believe what you cannot see. And not only that, you not only have to believe that God exists, but also that God actually does stuff. Now, let's use an earthly illustration for this. When a man says, I believe in my wife, is he saying the same thing as, I believe that I have a wife? No, not the same. If a man says, I believe I have a wife, that means that he can verify it by going back to the house and seeing if she's still there. Enough said. But if he believes in his wife, this means that he believes he can trust her. He knows that she will speak well of him and do things for him and encourage him and not hurt him. And thus, when we say we believe in God, that's different from saying, I believe that God exists. You can't say that I believe in God and then say, well, I don't believe that He can do what the Bible says that He can and did do. That cannot exist in one's mind. Now, admitting that you are struggling with your faith is not a bad thing. I like the account in the Bible where Jesus heals a boy with an evil spirit. And the father brings the boy to Jesus and says, "If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." If you can, Jesus said. Everything is possible for him who believes. And immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." And when the father pleaded, "Help me overcome my unbelief," he was using the same word that described Thomas's lack of faith. But this time, this man is admitting his weakness. He wasn't saying that I don't believe in Jesus. He's just admitting that he has a problem. But in spite of his struggle with unbelief, he is saying, I am making a conscious decision to believe. I believe. Help my unbelief. Lee Iacocca, the creator of the Ford Mustang, once told a business associate, "The trouble with you is that in college they taught you not to take any action until you had all of the facts. You've got 95% of them, but it's going to take another 6 months to get that last 5%. And by the time you do, they will be out of date." Somewhere along the line in your life, you're going to be faced with making a choice. And you're not going to have all of the information that you would like. But you still need to make that decision. If you always wait until you have all of the information, then you may never make a choice. Now, Thomas had all kinds of information. He walked with Jesus for 3 years. He had seen Christ heal hundreds of people by just touching them. He fed thousands of people with just a small amount of food, and he raised people from the dead. He had far more information than you or I have, and yet he needed this extra little bit. And because of that, he almost ruined his relationship with Jesus Christ. At some point along the line in our faith, you and I had to make a choice about following God. We had to choose to believe. We had to decide that we believed actually that God could do various things in our lives. And we accepted them even though we didn't fully understand them. But we believed in Him. Tony Campolo, who was once a professor at a university in Pennsylvania, told of the time that when he finished a lecture, one of his students stood and said, "Dr. Campolo, you seem to be a reasonable man. How can you, with your sophistication, really believe the Bible?" And Campolo replied, "It's easy. I decided to. And I have to explain. Once I decided that I believe in it, I spent the next 35 years of my life accumulating arguments to support what I already believed. But reason only came afterwards. It only supported what I've already committed myself to." And then Campolo told the student, "Now before you get nasty with me, I have to ask you a question. Why don't you believe in the Bible? Isn't it because you've decided to? Now, please don't tell me that you have read it from cover to cover. Spare me that. And don't give me that jazz that it's full of contradictions because you can't name 5. Somewhere along the line, Campolo said, you decided not to believe, and after you decided not to believe, you began accumulating to support your commitment to non-belief. And the kid looked up at Campolo and said, but you don't understand. For me to believe in God, I have to have a God that I can understand. And Campolo replied, God refuses to be that small. Now here's the deal. If your God was small enough to understand, then He would be too small to worship. We serve a big God who goes beyond anything that we can understand or explain. We have a God who can accomplish way more than we can ever begin to imagine in our minds. And we need to boldly proclaim that our God can do exactly what He says that He can do.